if all you're searching for is the next hit of feel good from a like or a positive comment on your social media, then literally you are putting the state of your well-being and your value and your worth onto others. And that will never bring you any kind of joy.
Connor, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having me, and I appreciate the laughs that we've had already that the listeners know nothing about.
That never happened. If there's no pics, it did not happen.
That's
So
right.
I don't know what you're talking about. Look, I would love for you to explain who you are, your mission, and how you're going about getting there in a bit of an elevator pitch for the listeners.
Oh boy, I'm terrible at elevator pitches.
That's all right. We can work on this.
That's okay. That's okay. I run a men's mental health company, so our slogan is it's not therapy, it's training. So the easiest way to put it is what I do is help men lead themselves more effectively in life, whether that's how they lead themselves in their relationship, in their marriage, in their work, their business, their career, their vocation, finding a sense of purpose. But that's really it, because I've found that for a lot of men, they are struggling to lead themselves in some capacity, in some area of their life. So that's really what we do. We help men lead themselves more effectively.
And how are you doing that?
And I think I lost.
Oh, really?
I was like, I think I lost you. How am I doing that? I mean, we have a bunch of different opportunities. We have live men's weekends where we take guys, we just did one out on the coast of Washington, where we bought out this entire campground and we had 30 men descend upon the area, and we walked them through an initiation process.
I'm thinking like on a fucking horses or something. Right. There's an army of men.
Chopper. Yeah, there's choppers involved. They have to descend from the helicopter. We have an online membership that's it's called the Alliance. There's men's groups in there. We've got about 450 members in that. I have some online programs. And then the big piece is I wrote a book called Men's Work, where it's really a self-led guide for men who are looking to go on the inner journey, right? Who are looking to stop sabotaging, who are looking to confront the bullshit that they've been dealing with in their life, the excuses, and really making it a kind of tactical, pragmatic approach to doing basically like psychological warrior training, right? Being able to actually get yourself into the arena with your own mind, your own heart, your own body, and to start to face the stuff that's been getting in the way of you being the type of individual that you actually want to be.
Brilliant. And there's a lot in that, and it makes me wonder why you've gone down this path. So maybe it'd be interesting to hear about kind of what the context of your early years were, and then that might allow the listeners to understand you, and then kind of how it's influenced you to contributing to the world.
Yeah, I mean, the short version of it was I was a shit show.
Tell me more.
Just a complete clusterfuck of a human being. But no, I mean, I was really out of control for a long time, or that was the story that I told myself. I was lying, I was cheating.
Where do you think that came from?
I mean, that definitely came from childhood for sure. How do I want to get into that? I think, in many ways, like my parents were separated when I was 3. They both started different families. And so my dad got remarried, my mom got remarried in the same year. And then they both had a daughter in the same year. And then they both had a son in the same year with, their significant others. And so I grew up between these two family systems, which were almost identical, but completely opposite. And so I got very curious about how people work and why people think the way that they think. Because I was constantly observing, why is mom different from stepmom? Why is my sister different over here than she is over there? And all the while kind of not really feeling like I fit in with either family system.
I was going to say that. Did you feel like you belonged? I understand that feeling a lot.
Yeah, I mean, I think in times I definitely did, in my mom's family, and there were moments, but I think as I got older, in my 12, 13, 14 years old, I started to feel like, oh, I actually don't like both of these systems are fine without me. That was the sort of lingering sense. My stepdad and I did not have a good relationship at all. It was very combative. It was, abusive at times. My dad wasn't really playing a significant role in my life, even though I desperately wanted him to. And so I think a lot of that coupled with, I was pretty average in school. I struggled academically. I was pretty average in sports. And so I graduated high school with no direction, no real prospects. And I ended up working in a gravel pit in northern Alberta in February in like minus 50 weather conditions, being, kind of thinking like, what the hell am I doing with my life?
How did we get here?
Yeah. How did I get here? And, it was a lot of like drinking, a lot of drugs, a lot of womanizing, because my life didn't actually have a lot of meaning or substance to it. And, I that eventually changed. I found a career path that I went down and I pursued, and I went and got a bachelor's degree. And when I got
what was that in?
It was in music. So I was a classical singer.
Okay. Yeah, I did know that.
So, I ended up traveling around the world and performing in China and Czech Republic, Italy, Germany, France, all over North America. Yeah. But, in the background was just a very deep sort of pain and questioning from my early days that was unresolved, that I hadn't dealt with, that no one had really taught me or told me, how to actually carry it. And so, I had a lot of coping mechanisms, right? Alcohol, women, porn, sometimes drugs, speed racing. I had a sports bike, and so I'd street race that. So I had a lot of these really maladaptive coping mechanisms that were at their core very self-destructive. And those things were there because I sort of two parts. I didn't really know myself. And then secondly, the parts of myself that I did know, I really didn't like. I was not a man that I respected. I was not a man that I was proud of. I was not a man that, I felt like had direction or any type of clarity. And so, that kind of led me to bottom out and hit rock bottom.
When was rock bottom? Like, what was rock bottom?
Well, I wrote about this in the book. It kind of like, it's how I sort of opened the book, but rock bottom was living out of the back of my car. I had a 2007 Pontiac G5 with beautiful chrome rims. It was black with a big chunky fin on the back and two racing stripes down the middle of it. It was really a magnet. But bottoming out was, I had been in this relationship with this woman that I really loved. I had been pretty consistently and chronically unfaithful. I had lied about a lot of things in my life, lied to friends, lied to family members. And she found out about a lot of the stuff that had been going on. She left. I didn't want to tell people what I had done because I had a lot of shame around it. And so I just put all my stuff into storage and lived out of the back of my car for a few weeks while I, sort of like sulked in my own self-pity and tried to figure out what the hell I should do, moving forward. And when I realized that I couldn't continue to hide the truth of my life and what I was experiencing internally, I started to have real conversations with people in my life. And so one of them, there's two conversations that sort of changed the trajectory. One was with a buddy of mine where I told him everything, and he proceeded to sort of open up and admit that he had tried to take his own life 6 weeks before.
Oh man.
And so, it kind of hit me in that moment that like I knew everything about this guy. and he knew everything about me except for the the shit that we had been hiding. I knew what he liked to drink and the women he liked to date and the shows he liked to watch, but I didn't know that he was struggling so bad that he had tried to take his own life. And he didn't know that I was, sort of spiraling out of control for the last year and a half. And
did you have, on a quick side note, because this is a really important point I wanted to talk to you about later on, but have you had any friends commit suicide?
I've had people in my life commit suicide, not close friends.
The reason I ask is I've had, especially in our hometown, I've had probably 5 or 6 in my direct vicinity of like friend group or like friend of friends. And it feels like once a year since I was 18, we've had this exact thing, going to another funeral. And I wonder to myself, and maybe you've got some direction that you might be able to lead, the listeners or anyone listening to this, so that isn't necessarily the person in the pain, but the person on the other side that wants to be there for their friends, but just doesn't feel like they can. What have you seen from your work in that space?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of look, I have men reach out to me all the time who are really struggling, and I have men that show up to our weekends that have had suicidal ideations all the time. And, sometimes it's because they are carrying a very deep trauma that they've not disclosed to anybody, that no one really knows about, right? Sexual abuse or physical abuse that they dealt with, or, some accident that they had, that they were a part of, that they've never really processed. But it can be very challenging to know that there's somebody in your life who's really struggling to that degree. And, one of the things, there's a couple of things that can be helpful. One is to simply ask what it's like to be in that person's head and experience.
So how would that look? Like, what kind of questions would that actually be?
Just that. What's it like to be in your head? Sometimes, what's it like to be in your experience, to live your life? Sometimes, when things are dark, when things aren't going well, that can be a very good question to ask. I think the second thing, which, I'll tell a little bit of I'm trying to be respectful about this one, but, my mom battled with addiction, and, there were many years where I was trying to, sort of a classic form, get her to go to rehab. And this is the same thing that plays out with people who we know have suicidal ideation in our life, right? We're trying to get them to go get help. We're trying to get them to seek support. And there came a moment where I had to say, whatever you decide to do, I just want you to know that it's your choice. I will honor your choice, and I'll love you anyway. And it doesn't mean that I won't have certain boundaries or that I won't, proceed with certain things, but I just want you to know that it's your choice. And she eventually was diagnosed with terminal cancer. And I had to have that conversation with her again, because she was going to have to go through chemo. She is going through chemo now. And I said, if you are going through chemo and you drink, you're going to die. You'll just kill it. That'll be killing yourself. And I said, I just want you to know that whatever you decide to do, whether you decide to, get sober and do chemo, or not do chemo and drink, or whatever it is, whatever you choose, I will love you. I will honor your choice, and I'll just love you, and I'll be here for you. And if you want to talk about any of it, then I'm here 100%.
That's a very tough space to hold.
Yes.
That is a really, really, for you, that's very intense. Like, it takes a lot to be strong enough to be able to even have a slight conversation like that.
Yeah, I don't know if it's strength per se. I appreciate that. I think in some ways what we often miss is that when people are struggling to that degree, whether it's addiction, whether it's suicidal ideation, they don't feel like they have a choice. They don't feel like they have a choice in their thoughts, in their experience, in, their addiction. They and oftentimes people in their life are treating them like they don't have a choice. They're saying, you have to go to rehab, you have to go to a therapist, you have to go get help, you need to do this. And so what they're hearing over and over and over and over again is, I don't have a choice or a say in what's happening in my life. And it's incredibly profound to experience the kind of love that comes delivered in the package of, I will love you even if you decide to, continue with this addiction, or even if you decide to go down a path of taking your own life. And it's not an easy conversation, but it's liberating for the other person in a way, because just once they have one person in their life who loves them, who says, you get to choose. This is your choice.
You have agency.
You have agency,
Yeah.
And so I don't remember exactly where this whole thread came from.
It came from the friend's suicide, and then how to be the partner that isn't feeling it, but like supporting. And then you spoke about your mum with her addiction.
Yeah. And so maybe I'll just tie that up, which is one of the things that I think the personal development industry and the self-help space and even the therapeutic space isn't talking about enough is the power of choice. And when we get into relationships, so much of the breakdown that starts to happen is that we start to try and subtly control the other person, right? I see this all the time in relationships. People come to work with me or come to work with my wife because she's a marriage and family therapist. And a huge amount of the breakdown is that both people are acting in ways to shut down the other person's choice, right? It's like, well, I need you to do this or be this. And so you don't have a choice in the matter. You just got to figure it out. I need the kitchen to be cleaned like this. I need you to show up like this. I need you, it just goes on and on and on. And so a lot of people, the sad part is that a lot of people don't feel like they have choice in their relationships. And the even more unfortunate thing is that a lot of people don't actually trust their own choices. They don't trust themselves enough individually to make coherent, meaningful choices for themselves. And so they are completely disenfranchised and completely disempowered because they are constantly in a mode of questioning whether or not they are making the right choice, whether or not it's a good choice, whether or not that choice is, whether or not they even have the means or capacity to make a good choice. Like it's brutal. And I think a lot of people's internal dialogue is so abusive and volatile and negative that the notion that you as an individual can make a good choice just seems so far-fetched. And so part of our work, both individually and relationally, in my framework, is empowering the people around us to make their own choices, even if sometimes it's the wrong one. That doesn't mean that there are no consequences. That doesn't mean that we justify them, going out and smoking crack or, hiring a prostitute. Like that's not it. It's simply that we notice when we are in the position of cutting off somebody else that we love from having a choice in their own life. And we start to empower them and say, I trust you to make this choice for yourself. So I'll pause there because I feel like I've been
no, I love it. You're spitting facts, man. I love it. Absolutely love it. Well, we can loop back to, I kind of cut you off at the opening up at rock bottom, and you're talking to your friend. He mentioned he tried to commit suicide 6 weeks ago, and you were kind of mentioning what led you to the point where you are now, and like what was that key catalytic? Is that a word? I think that's a word.
Yeah. Catalytic.
Moment towards where you are now in what you're doing.
Yeah. So that was a part of it, because I started to see that in almost all of my male relationships, they were very surface level and they were sort of pseudo relationships because they lacked depth, and there was big parts of each of us, right? There's a big part of me that I wasn't bringing into relationship with other men, and vice versa. That guys, we were generally withholding our flaws, our weaknesses, the shit that we were struggling with. We just didn't really talk about that kind of stuff. And I saw how prominent that was, and I saw how detrimental it was to every man's life, right? Detrimental to their career, their financial well-being, their relationships, their sex life, their mental health, their physical health. And then secondly, I stumbled across a mentor who really started to change things. He had been in my life for a few years. And when I hit rock bottom, he and I had a conversation, and he sort of created an invitation for him to just support me. He kind of just said, like, why don't you just come over? We'll just talk. And me showing up and just sort of talking and having these kind of sessions with him turned into me apprenticing with him and me learning about, therapeutic and psychological modalities and studying Carl Jung and archetypes and cognitive behavioral therapy and Gestalt and, all these different areas that I had sort of been completely oblivious to. And so those two things really put me on a different path and trajectory. And I didn't know what I was going to do with it until years later when I started Mantalks. But that relationship really kind of pulled me out of a dark place because, he sort of took me under his wing. He was in his early 70s. And so I would, pay him for his time when I could afford it. And when I couldn't, I would work around his farm and help him farm his asparagus because he just loved asparagus for some reason. And I would chop wood and, pile wood and cut down trees and, do all that kind of stuff to just have the equal exchange. And that really taught me the value of, a real apprenticeship. And I've been fortunate since to continue that on, to work with and apprentice with some really incredible men who have been masters in their field.
How do you go about finding someone to become an apprentice with? Because I'm noticing in my world at the moment, I'm personally feeling quite lost, and it's always been quite you just follow the threads as I go. But it's a lot of the times it's like me just chopping down fucking in a forest and no idea where to go. And most of the people that maybe could be mentors are well above ever having any access to. And the only way I do gain that mentorship is purely through like a podcast or reading a book. But there's never really been that kind of one-to-one consistent, development. So how can people find those mentors and then maintain them? And then also you noted around the equal exchange. A lot of people, it's hard for people to do that too. So it's a very complex approach, thing to find somebody to mentor you. Like, what do you think people should do? And by people, I mean me.
Yeah, that's good. I could read between the lines. I got it. Like I've been working with men for a decade. I can see through the question. I think generally, my path, I think, has been very different than the majority of people. I've been quite fortunate to really, truly stumble across 3 or 4 men who have been exceptional mentors in my life. And I think
did it happen organically?
Yeah, it just happened organically. And I think what I will say is that it's always been more of an experiential thing than a rational thing. It's more of like, oh, this man embodies something, and I've connected with something that he has developed within him that I don't fully understand, but I know that I need. And he represents something that I know I'm working on in my life, but haven't really quite figured out. And that, you can go and sign up and do a course and, learn knowledge from most people. It's different to have the exchange of receiving the embodied wisdom and depth that somebody has curated within themselves over the course of 4 decades. That's a very different thing. And so
very different.
What I usually say is stay attuned to the people who you don't necessarily fully know exactly why you are drawn to them, but you know that there's something within your body, there's something that's non-rational about your pull towards them. And that yes, there's something, knowledge based that you want to learn from them, but there's something embodiment based, right, within the physical way of being that you're also wanting to learn. We as men over index our rational mind. It's not meant to tackle all problems. It's not meant to deal with all of our relational problems, emotional problems, sexual issues. It's not meant to do those things. It's meant to do cognitive, linear processes. And so we have to begin to get out of our mind, out of our rational thinking, right? Einstein said that the rational mind is a faithful servant. The intuitive mind is a
terrible
sacred
master.
gift, right? And so we've just, we've pedestaled the rational mind. And so when you can start to tune into like, oh yeah, that guy or that woman has some really incredible knowledge and wisdom that I appreciate, but there's also something deeper than that, where being in their presence has a certain quality and magnetic aspect to it that I feel drawn in, and I think that's been important. And then what that's looked like, I mean, honestly, most of the time it's you're paying for it, right? You're putting it, like, it's very rare that, like blacksmithing as an example, that was a true apprenticeship where you weren't necessarily paying to learn to blacksmith. You were training under somebody, you were apprenticing under somebody. That
but
modality,
they're also getting an output from you. They're getting something. There's always going to be something they're gonna.
There's an exchange.
What's in it for them? There's always got to be something in it for them.
That's
Otherwise,
right.
There's no motivation.
Yeah, and so there has to be some kind of an exchange there. And so I usually say, don't hesitate to find somebody where you can, like, you're paying for that training, you're paying for that mentorship, you're paying for that apprenticeship, because that's largely the structure within our society. And there might also be opportunities for you to volunteer and contribute. So I think that those opportunities are something that you have to put yourself out for. But for me, that's the real education. I could have gone back and done a master's in psychology or a PhD in psychology. I've had the opportunities, and I didn't want to do that. I've wanted to sit with the individuals who are the masters in their craft, who are the best of the best, that have sat and done it for 40, 50 years, and learn from them. Because for me, that's invaluable. It's like being able to take the knowledge and the experience of 40 years and be around that, and to disseminate that, and to bring that into your own body. I mean, that is profound to me.
Yeah, it's crazy.
Yeah. So anyway,
where do you think, would you call yourself a spiritual person? Because I feel there's quite a lot of kind of spiritual elements to what you're saying, but you've not yet kind of touched on any clear spiritual practice that you undertook. And I've noticed a lot of people that go down this pathway have some pivotal spiritual moment where they've gone, oh, there's a lot more to this. This makes a lot more sense with this element in place.
Yes. I certainly have been, walking, however we want to describe that, some sort of a spiritual path, for a very long time. I took some theology classes in university. I've always been interested in different forms of religion. I think where I stand on it is, I sort of studied the Tao for a long time because I was fascinated by it. And the very first line of the Tao is that the Tao that's called the Tao is not the Tao, which simply translates.
What does that even mean?
What's that?
What does that even mean?
What it means is the way that's called the way is not the way. And so
what does that mean?
it means that as soon as you have said, here's the pathway to enlightenment, you've lost it. As soon as you said, here's what enlightenment is. You've lost the connection to what it actually is. You're describing something that actually isn't it, right? It's like you can describe the taste of ice cream or what it is or what it looks like, but it's actually not the experience of the ice cream itself. And so for me, rather than, I think I'm wary sometimes of people who talk about what a spiritual person they are, because that doesn't coincide with a lot of what the spiritual teachings are. It's, for me, spirituality is something that you are, is something that you live, it's something that you embody, and it's not necessarily something that is put out there. And it's interesting because I've been getting this question more, because I've been finding that a lot more men have been coming out to my weekends and showing up in my programs, and underneath the challenges with their partners, the problems with their kids and their businesses and their finances, is a much deeper question of, why does any of this matter? And why am I here?
And what's the answer to those two questions?
That's good. That's good. Yeah. So, and for me, that's the beauty of some of this work, is getting to guide men on a path of exploring what that might be for them, and I think that anybody that actually says that they have the answer to that is selling something that I don't want to buy. I think that's kind of where I've landed in my journeys, because I've sat with some incredibly spiritual people who aren't promoting themselves as spiritual people, and I find
it's
that
like a gentle kind of like nudge, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's like just so very subtle.
Yeah. And so for sure, I do breath work, I meditate, I do yoga, I do yoga every single morning. I mean, it's a fancy version of stretching, basically, right? I stretch a bunch, but it's
been around for thousands of years,
right.
And at the core of it, they've probably got something right.
Yeah, they figured something out. But it's been interesting because I do it every morning, and now it's warm outside in the summer. I'll stretch outside in the morning before having coffee, and my son has joined me, and so he does some of the stretches with me every single morning. He's 2.5, but
I love that.
Yeah, I think that probably answers the question.
Yeah. Nice. I want to pivot across to. Well, there's so many threads I want to take this, but the modern masculinity is quite a interesting concept right now. There's like, on one part you've got the feminist movement that is around, and then you've got this kind of straight males that are also a bit femme in the way they dress, and then you've got like the supportive, like much more supportive kind of gay men, and then there's a lot of just like competing areas, and then you've just got the standard guy that doesn't really know where they fit in all of this anymore. They had their traditional role in society as a breadwinner. That's now kind of gone. But in place of that is kind of the equal rights element. But now it's like, I know a lot of people that are like, well, I don't know what the fuck I'm supposed to be doing, who I am, what I'm supposed to be contributing. And I think it's also hurting society as a whole, because now you've got half the population, a big chunk of half the population that's completely directionless and doesn't really know what to do. So like, what are the challenges at the moment for, well, I've probably answered that question, but what do you think the challenges are for masculinity in 2023? And we'll kind of explore it from there.
I would say that we've largely, as a culture and as a society, dislocated the value of masculinity from our culture. So there's this kind of extraction that is happening that's devaluing masculinity as something that is necessary and even regenerative or contributive to the people that make up our culture and our society.
So
And
pressing on that,
Mhm.
what do you think is that grounded in any form of reality or truth to you, or do you think it's just it's the pendulum swinging too far in the other direction because it's maybe been too far in one direction for a while?
I mean, I think that is the pendulum swinging too far in the other direction. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I think those two things are the same thing. And I think that a lot of men, and this isn't by any means a like women are this or women are saying that or
No,
like this.
never. Of
That's
course
not
not.
that's
Of
not it
course
at
not.
all. It's, as men, I think for a lot of men, they've lost connection to the value of masculinity as well, because we've grown up in households and a society that has had a huge vacuum of positive, healthy male role models, and have grown up in a society where, like 1 in 4 kids in America are going to grow up without a father in the household. And so if masculinity is something that we view, that we model, that is something that needs to be exemplified by others, just like femininity is, then how are we supposed to know what healthy masculinity can look like? And masculinity, by the way, it's such an interesting thing, because as soon as you start to define, like, this is what masculinity is, that's where all hell breaks loose, right? Because
can you please define masculinity and
femininity
femininity too? Let's start there.
I like your interview style. Just creating just shit to
chaos. Chaos.
I'm learning a lot about you here, my friend. You better watch out. We're gonna have our next interview, and it's just gonna basically be me doing a session with you, and we'll see how that goes.
I would be so down for that. Honestly, if you want to do that, I will record that and we can put that up as an episode.
Okay, let's do it. Let's do it.
Done.
Masculinity is an amoral experience that's made up of certain virtues and characteristics. So when I say amoral, I mean it's neither good nor bad. When people talk about masculinity within our culture, they are almost always referring to masculinity or femininity as something that is good or bad. And
where do you think that came from?
I think it comes from people's individual experiences of interacting with men, or what they have perceived to be masculine. So if you're a man or a woman who was a child and your father was abusive and he represented masculinity to you,
your threat is all men.
Right. That's gotcha. Going to influence the way that you perceive men and masculinity, unless you have done something to heal that wounding. Right. And so for many of us, because many individuals, men and women alike, have been hurt and have been hurt by men, or have been wounded by men not being around, the perception is that men and masculinity is bad, or men and masculinity is wrong, or men and masculinity are broken, or we need less masculinity, or we need men to sit down, or, some masculinity is okay, but there's this whole branch of toxic masculinity, and we need to really crack down on any type of masculine behavior. And what that leaves people with is a kind of being disenfranchised with what masculinity is. And so you'll notice that when you talk to anybody, the majority of people don't really have a clue what it actually is. And and like I said, it's an amoral, it's a non-good or bad amalgamation of characteristics and virtues. And oftentimes those characteristics and virtues, which can be seen in myth, which can be seen in culture, which can be seen in individuals, right? Which can be, we can just go down the list over and over and over again, are oftentimes associated with things like assertiveness and order and structure and leadership. And those those are some of the pillars that often embody what it means to be masculine. The funny thing is that as soon as you start to lay out some of those characteristics and principles, people get all bristled, right? It's like, well, women can be assertive as well. And it's like, nobody said that they can't, right? But
masculinity, it's a masculinity trait, not a male trait.
Right.
Right?
Yes, that's right. And so, there's certain characteristics and principles that make up masculinity, and that has value, just like there's certain characteristics and traits that make up femininity, and that has value.
And what are those feminine traits that you have seen?
I think generally speaking, and then again, this is a generalization, nurturing, kindness, comfort. I think if you look at, and again, this is cross-cultural, this is across research, this is across many different forms, right? This isn't just like personal opinion. Those are the things that the feminine generally comes to embody. Nurturing, especially. It's just a cornerstone of femininity. And I think that that's a beautiful, wonderful thing. It's so interesting that we've gotten to this place where to say that is to be met with vitriol sometimes of like, well, men can be nurturing too. And it's like, well, I'm not saying that men can't be nurturing. I'm incredibly nurturing with my son. Yeah. Like if you saw me with my son, you'd be like, oh, he's very nurturing. But I'm also creating a ton of order and structure and direction. And I'm also assertive with him, and so these things have value because when we dislocate from them, it can create a tremendous amount of chaos. And so maybe I'll pause there.
Yeah. So basically, just to sum it all up, you've got masculinity, which is orderly, kind of like a spreadsheet. And then you've got femininity that maybe is a Word doc. And you're not saying that, right? Like go anywhere. But they both have their places. And you're not by any means saying that male is masculine, female is feminine. You can have masculine women and feminine men, and you can have somewhere in the middle, you can have all of that stuff.
Yes.
You're defining the pillars of those two elements, those two polarities in the human experience.
Yes. And if you don't like the word masculine and feminine, if that is something that really disrupts your internal state, use yin and yang.
Call it flubber-dub. Call it whatever the fuck you want to call it.
A friend of mine, Michaela Bohm, calls it go and flow. Right.
Right.
So go is the masculine, flow is the feminine, right? Go is the direction, it's the order, it's the structure, it's where you're going. Flow is like this constant movement and ever changing process. So that's probably a good way of also stating it.
It's all branding, right?
That's right. Yeah. It's all about branding these days.
So literally. So, you made a point before where you mentioned that a lot of men are, a lot of male children are not growing up in a household where the men are. What do you think is the recent, I don't know if this is correct or not, but is there like more prevalence in men leaving the family dynamic now than there used to be? And what do you think is causing men to run away from the family dynamic these days that might not have occurred in the past?
Well, that's a loaded question. That almost feels mean, Adam.
Oh, no. Okay, we don't have to answer that.
No, I'm kidding. I'm joking. I'm joking around with you. I think, look, it's a bit of a complicated situation, I think, in the dating world. I think the dating world is a disaster right now. I think most people that are in the dating world probably agree with that. I think dating apps have over-indexed certain mating preferences and certain choices, and it's made it very, very easy. Like if you go on to Tinder or Bumble or Hinge, these are all apps where, for security purposes, for safety purposes, women have the choice and the power of whether or not any kind of conversation happens, right? And so what that's done is it has over amplified female selection preferences. So if you go on and you look at Tinder data or Bumble or Hinge data, what you find is that men who fit the criteria of what women are looking for have the run of the mill, right? There was some research that came out that
I've heard that from my friends. Yeah, it's crazy. I mean, I wouldn't know personally, but
yeah, they're like, if you took 50 women and 50 men on Tinder, 45 women are going after 5 of the men, right? So you have 90% of the women going after 5% of the men, or 4% of the men, or whatever it works out to be. And the bottom 50% of men on these apps, they just can't even get a conversation. They'll swipe right 20,000 times and not even get a date. And so you have a lot of men who are very disenfranchised from dating, from relationships. The social dynamics between men and women have radically changed, and we as a culture haven't talked about it, right? 42% of households in America, women are the breadwinners. Now, I'm not saying that it's a bad thing. I'm simply saying that the roles have been turned upside down in a lot of households. And the expectation oftentimes that women still have of men is that they are the earner. Right. If you look at what women want statistically in the research, cross-culturally, cross-religions, all over the world, women still prefer a man who has resource acquisition capacity, aka he has the ability to make money and acquire resources, whether it's financially or socially, either now or in the future. And so that's at odds with the reality of what our culture is living in, where young women are the ones buying houses predominantly. Young women are now starting to out earn young men on average, and are in the workforce more than men, and are graduating college more than men. And so the conversation hasn't caught up to the reality of what's happening. And so I think a lot of men are looking at the situation. They're saying, well, if I'm not a viable mate for women, then why would I even bother getting married? And then I think when you couple that with the reality of what sometimes, quite often, the divorce system looks like for men, a lot of guys are like, well, why would I get married? Why would I want to have this responsibility? It's not clear what my role is. It seems like I keep hearing from women that they don't need me, which for a man, that's a very detrimental thing, because all men want a function and a purpose in a relationship. And so a lot of guys are like just kind of checking out, and women are equally as tired, right? They're like, where are all the emotionally intelligent men, and where are the men who are, who have their life together, and, all of those pieces. And so I think a lot of guys are, they're not too sure what narrative they fall into. And then you've got men like Andrew Tate who are out there, preaching Bugattis and, have 15 women in your compound, and that's very appealing for a lot of men. So I think it's a very complex thing. So hopefully I've just piled on as much as humanly possible to sort of paint a picture of like why so men,
basically,
and I think the last thing I'll say is there was some interesting data that came out that was showing, I think this was from 2018, so it's a little dated, or 2020. I think maybe 2020, that 27% of men between the ages of 18 and 29 were not sexually active within the last year, and were not in a relationship.
I heard that too.
And it wasn't the same for women. It was 13% of women. And so what's happened is that a lot of women between 18 and 29 can't find their man, the ideal man, in their age range. And so they're starting to date up. They're dating guys in their 30s and 40s, and finding men that are more secure financially, more secure in their career, or they're more open to a long-term relationship, or maybe young men are just wanting to date around and sleep around. And so the dynamics have just radically shifted. And I think where it just sort of depends on where you are within the demographic. But I see a lot of men in my YouTube comments that are just like giving the middle finger to marriage and giving the middle finger to having kids. Like, I did a video called "Should You Even Bother Having Kids?" I have a child, so clearly where I stand on that. But it's a question that I get a lot from men, because I hear things like, why would you want to bring a child into this world? And this, life is such a mess.
I've never got that. I mean, this is probably one of the best times in like human history to be alive.
Right.
Like, we have it so fucking good. As bad as it is, we have it so much better than we ever did.
Yeah. Yeah, and there's always been problems, right? It's like,
There's always been problems.
how could you bring a child
like
into
getting
today's
clubbed in the head with by like a caveman.
right?
Like that was one thing.
Yeah, it's like,
the wars,
do you be born?
self-actualization.
Yeah, be born 1,000 years ago and see how that goes for you, right? It's like,
Oh man.
anyway, yeah, tangent over.
So yeah, to answer the question on why do you think men are running away from the family dynamic, it all sounds pretty wild. So how do we navigate
What do you got? What are you gonna do with that?
this chaotic environment?
Well, look, I think I'll try and summarize this and condense this down because I think this is important. My answer to the question of why would you bother getting married or why would you bother having kids is because there's something innately meaningful in building something that is bigger than you that outlasts you. And that's been a biological, psychological imperative for men for as long as we've existed, that there's something just inherently meaningful in being a part of something and building something that's bigger than you and outlasts you. And so, in getting married, that's something that's bigger than me. I have to traverse my wife and what she wants and her desires and her wants and her challenges and her shadows and her pains, and to commit to doing something like that and putting the work into it, like I like to say that the relationship is the third body, right? That there's you, there's your partner, and then there's the relationship, which is a third entity that you have to learn.
Well, it is the interaction is its own entity, right?
That's right.
And that you see that with companies, you see that with like societies. It is its own organism.
Yeah.
So it makes complete sense.
It takes a certain level of responsibility and maturity to be able to nurture, develop, create structure, and have that relationship, that third body thrive. And then, having something that lives beyond you that's reproduction, right? That's having a child. And there's nothing like having a child that will frustrate you, that will bring you so much joy, that will bring you, a sense of what unconditional love really is and feels like and looks like. I mean, my son looks at me sometime and I'm like, that's it. That's it in a nutshell, right there in his eyes.
What does it feel like? Could you put it into words?
Well, that's the way that's called the way is not the way, right? As soon as I try and describe
the way is not the way. Yeah, I knew you were going to say that.
That's not it, right? It's not it. But it's as close to, I think it's as close to pure peace and pure awareness in a moment that I can possibly get. And I've had a lot of quote unquote spiritual experiences, and we can find them in these everyday moments. I've had moments where I'm watching my son run across the lawn or through the trees in the forest, and it's like nothing else matters in that moment. Absolutely nothing. And I think that it's a shame for men to miss out on the very real challenge, joy, love, and maturation that comes along with being a father. I think it's something to be strived for. And because I think every man knows it will require something of you very seriously, because no man wants to be a shit show for their son or their daughter. No man.
So we're all just pussies, basically.
Just all a bunch of bitches. That's it. Yeah, right.
The core of it, just.
It's confronting.
Buckle up and get into it.
It's confronting, man. It was scary as hell for me. It's very, very confronting, but it's incredibly meaningful.
I bet. Well, I mean, there's something I want to tie in here that you mentioned with the dating apps and people not being willing to put in the work for deep things. Like they take time, they take effort, they take nurturing. And I think with the current culture of swiping, fucking TikToks, everyone is like vaping. I'm going to do like an anti-vaping campaign at some point. I swear to God, because I feel like we're losing our ability to sit in things for longer than 5 seconds as a society. And we're seeing the damages that occurs because instead of doing the work, people move on to the next dopamine hit. And it's just playing out everywhere now. So what do you think people can do to begin to notice those challenges and break the cycles and then begin to get into the work that they need to do to then be the person that they need to be to go deep into things?
I'd say that you probably
like a little circle.
No, you're good. I'd say that you'd probably have to admit that you have some kind of addiction to growth and stimulus that you need to let go of, and be willing to pursue depth, which is a very different orientation in life. If all you're searching for is the next hit of feel good from a like or a positive comment on your social media, then literally you are putting the state of your well-being and your value and your worth onto others. And that will never bring you any kind of joy or fulfillment in a long-term, long-lasting, depth-oriented way. And so for me, all of my work, all of it, the podcast, my book, the weekends, they are all oriented around how do we as individuals grow deeper into ourselves, right? How do we grow down and root into ourselves authentically? Because anybody can create some brand or some persona and throw it out on the internet and gain millions of followers and still not know who the fuck they are. And that's largely useless. We don't need more lost people leading around lost people. We don't need that. We can clearly see the impact that that's having on our culture and our society. What we need are people who are starting to grow down into themselves, even if they don't have all the answers. I don't have all the answers. I don't pretend to have all the answers, but I'm interested in rooting into who am I? What fulfills me? What brings me joy? What gives my life meaning? Because if I can follow that thread long enough, it has a quality to it. It almost has like a magnetic quality to it that gets other people curious to do that for themselves, to re-anchor into meaning, purpose, and the qualities that make us human beings. And that, man, I just got to say that is going to be so important as AI continues to kick up within our culture. And you have all of these distractions that are taking you away from the fundamentals of reality and pulling you into the digital reality where those things are less relevant. You being rooted in who you are and what matters to you and knowing who you are and being authentic, those things we just all know are less relevant within the digital space. They just are, because it's a fabrication of reality and something that's constructed for your mind to plug into. So I think that the people who are rooting and really doing the work to develop into themselves, who am I? What brings me joy? How do I contribute to the people around me? How do I be honest? How do I be loving? How do I embody that on a regular basis? All of that is going to pay dividends in the long run, in my opinion.
Definitely. All of the technology elements are a great tool, but the moment they control you, it's a slippery slope.
Yeah.
A very slippery slope. Do you have, what do you need to do time-wise? Do you need to go?
I do need to depart because my wife is out of town and I'm on full dad duty right now. So I got to go take over.
No stress. Do you mind if I ask you one more question before we call it a day?
Please do.
Awesome. What is the meaning of life?
That's good. Yeah. Is that the real question? Yeah. I'm not sure that I'm supposed to disclose that.
You sound like a politician.
Right? No, I mean, I think the meaning of life is to make meaning out of life, right? It's to pay attention to the meaning that already exists within your life, and to live that, to embody that, to pursue it. And ultimately, I like Ram Dass's notion on this, that two parts. He said, we're all God in drag. And then second, he said, you are loving awareness. And so I think in some ways, the meaning of life is to return to this ability to be loving awareness as often as humanly possible, to bring love and in all of its form to people as often as you possibly can, because when we do that, we are conscious. And the majority of the time, we're just not conscious. We're just running on autopilot and in our suffering and in our pain and our judgment and our shame and our embarrassment and all that other bullshit. And so if we can continue to just come back to awareness and expand that awareness, there's something deeply meaningful and profound to be found in that.
Brilliant. So just getting as close to love at all points in your life, in every element, every touch point of your life, if you can do it with love, creates quite a lot of meaning.
Yes.
Nice. Well, I mean, I feel like I have so many more things I'd love to talk to you about. So hopefully we can do a number 2, and I'm definitely down for that on podcast session. I will be very open to that. So if you seriously want to do that, we can
let's make it happen.
We can make that happen. Thanks, Connor. You're a legend. Appreciate you coming on the podcast.
Thank you.
Awesome.